Hey guys, also Sean here again, and I played my audiobook of Alice in Wonderland to help me get into the holiday spirit of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is in a couple of weeks. All this month, it's like all this month is Black Friday. All this month, not just feeling the holiday cheer. I need to scoot this up. So, okay. Just feeling good about Thanksgiving, Christmas. Okay, so this is part 2 of doing Kenya Moore and her baby Brooklyn. And it's a cartoon with Kenya, okay? It's a cartoon. It's not a portrait or anything. It's just a cartoon that's doing of her and her baby. A cartoon drawing, you know. And so I already showed you how to trace it out and everything. So now let's color it in. But not but. Why do I be saying but all the time? Maybe it's part of the Tourette's. I don't know. Trying to look for my black. Okay, I found my black so I can do her hair. Let's go. This is a crazy art black. Crazy art black is not as black like, it's not as pigment like the, what's the name? Premier Color Black. Premier Color Black is very pigmented. Very. So.
So long as I get somewhere, Alice added as an explanation. Oh, you're sure to do that, said the cat, if you only walk long enough. Alice felt that this could not be denied, so she tried another question. What sort of people live about here? In that direction, the cat said, waving its right paw around, lives a hatter, and in that direction, waving the other paw, lives a March hare. Visit either you like. They're both mad.
This is another crazy art black. I'm gonna see how this one looks.
Oh, you can't help that, said the cat.
It's like a shade darker, but it's not that dark.
How do you know I'm mad, said Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. Alice didn't think that proved it at all. However, she went on. And how do you know that you're mad? To begin with, said the cat, a dog's not mad. You grant that? I suppose so, said Alice. Well then, the cat went on, you see, a dog growls when it's angry and wags its tail when it's pleased. Now I growl when I'm pleased and wag my tail when I'm angry. Therefore, I'm mad. I call it purring, not growling, said Alice. Call it what you like, said the cat. Do you play croquet with the queen today? I should like it very much.
Cat got a small mouth,
but I
don't
haven't been invited yet. You'll see me there, said the cat, and vanished. Alice was not much surprised at this. She was getting so used to queer things happening. While she was looking at the place where it had been, it suddenly appeared again. By the by, what became of the baby, said the cat. I'd nearly forgotten to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice quietly said, just as if it had come back in a natural way. I thought it would, said the cat, and vanished again. Alice waited a little, half expecting to see it again, but it did not appear, and after a minute or two she walked on in the direction in which the March Hare was said to live.
Oh, excuse me.
I've seen
I got the
hatters
camera.
before, she said to herself. The March Hare will be much the most
So
interesting,
funny.
and perhaps, as this is May, it won't be raving mad. At least, not so mad as it was in March. As she said this, she looked up, and there was the cat again, sitting on a branch of a tree. Did you say pig or fig? Said the cat. I said pig, replied Alice, and I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. You make one quite giddy. All right, said the cat, and this time it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of the tail and ending with the grin, which remained some time after the rest of it had gone. Well, I've often seen a cat without a grin, thought Alice, but a grin without a cat is the most curious thing I ever saw in my life. She had not gone much farther before she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right house, because the chimneys were shaped like ears, and the roof was thatched with fur. It was so large a house that she did not like to go nearer till she had nibbled some more of the left-hand bit of the mushroom, and raised herself to about 2 feet high. Even then she walked up towards it rather timidly, saying to herself, "Suppose it should be raving mad after all. I almost wish I'd gone to see the Hatter instead." End of chapter 6, read by Kara Schallenberg, March 2010, in San Diego, California.
Okay, so we got that down. Her hair.
Chapter 7 of
I'm trying to get myself comfortable, but when you got bad arthritis, it's kind of hard to get comfortable. I'm gonna have to move this camera a bit because it's in my way. And I ain't gonna lie, my arthritis is really bothering me a lot. It's bothering me a lot. Okay, so we got that down. I want to go and do Kill Your Eyes. I think she wore contacts, I'm not for sure, but I got the Crazy Art Brown. And if it's not what I am looking for, then I will change it.
"No room, no room," they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea.
I think I want something more darker than that. That's another Crazy Art Brown, but it's a darker brown.
To offer it, said Alice angrily. "It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's laid for a great many more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. "You should learn not to make personal remarks," Alice said with some severity. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Come, we shall have some fun now," thought Alice. "I'm glad they've begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that," she added aloud. "Do you mean that you think you can find
Now
out
it's
the answer
time to
to
find her
it?" said the
skin
March Hare.
complexion.
"Exactly so," said
I'm
Alice.
putting out white.
"Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on.
Well, I tell you,
Alice
these
hastily
characters know they got a smart tune.
At least I mean what
I
I
think
say.
I'm gonna use Peach
That's the
this
same thing,
time.
you know. "Not the same thing a bit," said
Peach.
the Hatter. "You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the March Hare, "that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like." "You might just as well say," added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter, and here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens tasks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "What day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and then said, "The 4th. 2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't suit the works," he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. "It was the best."
Now I'm trying my toasted toffee.
"Yes, but some crumbs
Let's
must
see
have
how
got in
that
as well,"
looks
the Hatter
with the
grumbled.
peach.
"You shouldn't have put
I don't
it
think
in
I
with the
want to
bread
use
knife."
white.
The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily.
Now I
He
like the
dipped it
way
into his
this
cup of
looks.
tea and looked at it
So I'm
again.
going to use the Premier Color Peach, and I'm going to use the Toasted Toffee.
Alice had been looking over his
Really
shoulder with
brown
some curiosity. "What a funny
on here.
watch," she remarked.
How it look like
"It
that?
tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is." "Why should it?" muttered the Hatter. "Does your watch tell you what year it is?" "Of course not," Alice replied very readily, "but that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together." "Which is just the case with mine," said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to
On
have
the
no sort of
eyes,
meaning in it, and yet it was
put
certainly
brown,
English. "I don't
and
quite
after you put the
understand you,"
brown,
she said, as
put
politely as she
the
could.
Crazy Art
"The
black over
Dormouse
it
is asleep again," said the Hatter,
if you're
and he
using a
poured a little
marker
hot
to
tea on his
outline
nose.
the
The
face
Dormouse shook its head
and the
impatiently
eyes.
and said, without opening his eyes, of course, just what I was going to remark myself." "Have you guessed
So,
the riddle yet?"
Premier
the Hatter
Color
said, turning to Alice again.
Peach. Try not to
"No,
smudge.
I give it up,"
Smudge,
Alice
not
replied.
smudge.
"What's the answer?" "I haven't the slightest idea," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. "I think you might do something better with the time," she said, "than waste it in asking riddles that have no answers." "If you knew time as well as I do," said the Hatter, "you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. "Of course you don't," the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. "I dare say you never even spoke to time." "Perhaps not," Alice cautiously replied, "but I know I have to beat time when I learn music." "Ah, that accounts for it," said the Hatter. "He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling. 1:30, time for dinner." "I only wish it was," the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. "That would be grand, certainly," said Alice thoughtfully. "But then I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know." "Not at first, perhaps," said the Hatter, "but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked." "Is that the way you manage?" Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. "Not I," he replied. "We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know," pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. "It was at the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, 'Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at.' You know the song, perhaps?" "I've heard something like it," said Alice. "It goes on, you know," the Hatter continued, "in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle." Here the Dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep, "Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle, twinkle," and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. "Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse," said the Hatter, when the Queen jumped up and bawled out, "He's murdering the time! Off with his head!" "How dreadfully savage!" exclaimed Alice. "And ever since that," the Hatter went on in a mournful tone, "he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now." A bright idea came into Alice's head. "Is that the reason so many tea things are put out here?" she asked. Yes, that's it, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the things between whiles. Then you keep moving around, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as the things get used up. But what happens when you come to the beginning again? Alice ventured to ask. Suppose we change the subject, the March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady.
So I got the peach down. Now let's get used to toasted toffee. Red is brown. It's, I guess, supposed to be coffee color. Kenya's really pretty. I gotta give it to her. She's very pretty. Beautiful. But I think I want to put some highlights around Kenya, around her nose and her cheek and chin, and a little bit around her eyes before I put the toasted toffee. Oh shoot, I forgot to say no word.
And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time, there were 3 little sisters, the Dormouse began in a great hurry, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who always took a great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse, after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice gently remarked. They'd have been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse, very ill. Alice tried to fancy to herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, so she went on. But why did they live at the bottom of a well? Take some more tea, the March Hare said to Alice very earnestly. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied in an offended tone, so I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then
now just gonna lightly go across. Just lightly.
Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, it was a treacle well. There's no such thing, Alice was beginning very angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went, shh, shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, if you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story for yourself.
Now I want to lightly put this on first before I want to thicken it out.
One indeed, said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning to draw.
Try not to smudge too, because it still gets smudged, and you don't want that.
Treacle, said the Dormouse, without considering at all this time. I want a clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. He moved on as he spoke, and the Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal more confident before, as the March Hare had just
Again, the tail.
Again, so she began very cautiously. But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?
Mom,
you can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter. So I should think
this
you
story. What's up in here? And I will be right back to finish up Kenya face. If you want to, you can go and just finish up her whole face until I come back. But I'll be back. Okay, so I'm back. Put this back up. Turn my audio book back on.
Draw a treacle out of a treacle well. Stupid? But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, not choosing to notice this last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse. Well in. This answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting it. They were learning to draw, the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was getting very sleepy. And they drew all manner of things, everything that begins with an M. Why with an M, said Alice. Why not, said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by this time and was going off into a doze, but on being pinched by the Hatter, it woke up again with a little shriek and went on. That begins with an M, such as mousetraps and the moon and memory and muchness. You know you say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of a muchness? Really, now you ask me, said Alice, very much confused. I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in great disgust.
I ain't gonna lie, they were being pretty rude.
The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping that they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. At any rate, I'll never go there again, said Alice, as she picked her way through the wood. It's the stupidest tea party I ever was at in all my life. Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's very curious, she thought, but everything's curious today. I think I may as well go in at once. And in she went. Once more, she found herself in the long hall and close to the little glass table. Now, I'll manage better this time, she said to herself, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the garden. Then she went to work nibbling at the mushroom. She had kept a piece of it in her pocket, till she was about a foot high. Then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden, among the bright flower beds and the cool fountains. End of chapter 7, read by Kara Schallenberg, March 2010, in San Diego, California.
I think this do look a lot more better than what I had did yesterday.
Chapter 8 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8, The Queen's Croquet Ground. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this a very curious thing, as she went nearer to watch them. And just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, Look out now, 5. Don't go splashing paint over me like that. I couldn't help it, said 5 in a sulky tone. 7 jogged my elbow. On which 7 looked up and said, That's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others. You'd better not talk, said 5. I heard the Queen say only yesterday you deserved to be beheaded. What for? Said the one who had spoken first. That's none of your business, too, said 7. Yes, it is his business, said 5, and I'll tell him. It was for bringing the cooked tulip roots instead of onions. 7 flung down his brush and had just begun. Well, of all the unjust things, when his eye chanced to fall upon Alice as she stood watching them, and he checked himself suddenly. The others looked round also, and all of them bowed low. Will you tell me, said Alice a little timidly, why you are painting those roses? 5 and 7 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice. Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake, and if the Queen was to find it out, we should all have our heads cut off.
Okay, so I got this part down. So I'm ready to do Kenya Lists. We're going to peek.
Across the garden, called out, The Queen, the Queen! And the 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves themselves flat upon their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked round, eager to see the queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. These were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next, the 10 courtiers. These were ornamented all over with diamonds, and walked 2 and 2.
Yeah, it does. I'm not just something over.
After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came jumping merrily along hand in hand in couples. They were all ornamented with hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the white rabbit. It was talking in a hurried and nervous manner, smiling at everything that was said, and went by without noticing her. Then followed the knave of hearts, carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion. And last of all this grand procession came the king and queen of hearts.
Trying to clean up my mess.
Alice was rather doubtful whether she ought not to lie down on her face like the 3 gardeners, but she could not remember ever having heard of such a rule at processions. And besides, what would be the use of a procession, thought she, if people had all to lie down upon their faces so that they couldn't see it?
So I'm finished with Kenya. Now let's move on to her little baby.
When the procession came
Now,
opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her, and the queen said severely,
her baby.
She said it to the knave of hearts, who only
Let's
bowed and
try
smiled in reply.
this yellow,
Idiot, said the queen, tossing her head impatiently.
this
And
toasted
turning to Alice,
toffee.
she went on,
Might be
What's
too
your name,
dark. I
child?
don't know.
My name is Alice, so please your majesty, said Alice very politely. But she added to herself, Why, they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them. And who are these? Said the queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying round the rose tree. For you see, as they were lying on their faces, and the pattern on their backs was the same as the rest of the pack, she could not tell whether they were gardeners, or soldiers, or courtiers, or 3 of
I
her
think
own
I'm gonna
children.
use the
How should I know?
Premier
said Alice,
Cut Gold.
surprised at her own courage. It's no business of mine.
And did I use
The
this?
queen turned
I think I
crimson with
did.
fury,
I'm
and after
shopping it
glaring at
first.
her for a moment like a wild beast, screamed, Off with her head! Off! Nonsense, said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the queen was silent. The king laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, Consider, my dear, she is only a child. The queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, Turn them over. The knave did so very carefully.
Using the Crayola white for the list.
Get up, said the queen in a shrill, loud voice.
Okay,
And
so
the 3
I'm
gardeners
gonna put down
instantly
white
jumped
first
up
on her
and
baby.
began bowing to the king, the queen,
Be
the
careful
royal
you don't
children, and
smudge.
everybody else. Leave off that, screamed the queen. You make me giddy. And then, turning to the rose tree, she went on. What have you been doing here? May it please your majesty, said two, in a very humble tone, going down on one knee. We were trying. I see. Who had meanwhile been examining the roses, off with their heads. And the procession moved on, 3 of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. Shan't be beheaded, said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot. The 3 soldiers wandered about for a minute or 2 looking for them, and then quietly marched off after the others. Are their heads off? Shouted the queen. Their heads are gone, if it please your majesty, the soldiers shouted in reply. That's right, shouted the queen. Can you play croquet?
Okay, so now I want to get the peach.
As the question was evidently meant for her. Yes, shouted Alice. Come on then, roared the queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. It's a very fine day, said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the white rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. Very, said Alice. Where's the Duchess? Hush, hush, said the rabbit in a low, hurried tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then raised himself upon tiptoe, put his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, She's under sentence of execution. What for? Said Alice. Did you say Alice gave a little scream of laughter. "Oh, hush," the rabbit whispered in a frightened tone. "The queen will hear you. You see, she came rather late." And the queen said, "Get to your places," shouted the queen in a voice of thunder, and people began running about in all directions, tumbling up against each other. However, they got settled down in a minute or two, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet ground in her life. It was all ridges and furrows. The balls were live hedgehogs, the mallets live flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up and to stand on their hands and feet to make the arches.
My mom bought us some croquets when we were little.
The Alice found at first was in managing her flamingo.
Okay, so I got the piece down. Let's use this gold that I barely have left. Barely have any gold.
Just as she had got its neck nicely straightened out and was going to give the hedgehog a blow with its head, it would twist itself round and look up into her face with such a puzzled expression that she could not help bursting out laughing. And when she had got its head down and was going to begin again, it was very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unrolled itself and was in the act of crawling away. Besides, there was generally a ridge or furrow in the way wherever she wanted to send the hedgehog to, and as the doubled-up soldiers were always getting up and walking off to other parts of the ground, Alice soon came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult game indeed. The players all played at once without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while, and fighting for the hedgehogs. And in a very short time, the queen was in a furious passion, and went stamping about, shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," about once a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy. To be sure, she had not as yet had any dispute with the queen, but she knew that it might happen any minute. And then, thought she, what would become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that there's anyone left alive. She was looking about for some way of escape, and wondering whether she could get away without being seen, when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin, and she said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I shall have somebody to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat, as soon as there was mouth enough for it to speak with. Alice waited till the eyes appeared, and then nodded. "It's no use speaking to it," she thought, "till its ears have come, or at least one of them." In another minute the whole head appeared, and then Alice put down
Okay,
the flamingo, and began
I got the skin cut down. Let's do the baby lips.
She had someone to listen to
We're just going to put down Peach on her
to think that
little
there was enough of it now in sight,
lips.
and no more of it appeared. "I don't think they play at all fairly," Alice began, in rather a complaining tone. "And they all quarrel so dreadfully one can't hear oneself speak. And they don't seem to have any rules in particular. At least, if there are, nobody attends to them. And you've no idea how confusing it is, all the things being alive. For instance, there's the arch I've got to go through next, walking about at the other end of the ground. And I should have croqueted the queen's hedgehog just now, only it ran away when it saw mine coming." "How do you like the queen?" said the cat, in a low voice. "Not at all," said Alice. "She's so extremely—" Just then she noticed that the queen was close behind her, listening, so she went on, "Likely to win, then it's hardly worthwhile finishing the game." The queen smiled and passed on. "Who are you talking to?" said the king, going up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat," said Alice. "Allow me to introduce him."
I'm using that crazy art black.
"I don't like the look of it at all," said the king. "However, it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I'd rather not," the cat remarked. "Don't be impertinent," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. "I've read that in some book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the king very decidedly, and he called the queen, who was passing at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. "Off with his head," she said, without even looking round. I'll fetch the executioner myself, said the king eagerly, and he hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going on, as she heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming with passion.
She got a real pretty baby, I ain't gonna lie. This is a, like I said, it's a cartoon. It's not a portrait.
And she never knew whether it was her turn or not. So she went in search of her hedgehog. The hedgehog was engaged in a fight with another hedgehog, which seemed to Alice an excellent opportunity for croqueting one of them with the other. The only difficulty was that her flamingo was gone across to the other side of the garden, where Alice could see it trying in a helpless sort of way to fly up into a tree. By the time she had caught the flamingo and brought it back, the fight was over, and both the hedgehogs were out of sight. But it doesn't matter much, thought Alice, as all the arches are gone from this side of the ground. So she tucked it away under her arm, that it might not escape again, and went back for a little more conversation with her friend.
Crazy art white to help smooth it out. I decided to add the pink because I don't know, I just like it. I just like it.
Who were all talking at once, while all the rest were quite silent and looked very uncomfortable. The moment Alice appeared, she was appealed to by all three to say and they repeated their arguments to her.
I guess I could put pink right here so she could match her baby too. So
Exactly what they said.
let's get Kenya to match her baby. Hopefully Mom will be satisfied with this. Hopefully.
The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded, and that you weren't to talk nonsense. The queen's argument was that if
now I'm going to write Kenya. Oh, you know what? She got some eyelashes on this picture. So I guess I put some eyelashes there too.
That had made the whole party look so grave and anxious. Alice could think of nothing else to say, but it belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it. She's in prison, the queen said to the executioner. Fetch her here. And the executioner went off like an arrow. The cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone, and by the time he had come back with the Duchess, it had entirely disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down,
Trying to make it look thick.
while the rest of the party went back into the game.
I don't know why I just am.
End of chapter 8, read by Kara Schallenberg.
Just am,
March
but
2010, in San Diego, California.
I like my cartoon. I think it looks nice. Now I'm going to with my pencil.
Chapter 9 of Alice's
Write
Adventures
down her
in Wonderland
name on
by
top.
Lewis Carroll. This LibriVox recording is in the
Here
public
it is.
domain. Chapter
I'll
9,
write down her
The
name
Mock Turtle's Story.
right here.
You
Kenya.
can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing, said
I think
the
her name's
Duchess,
Kenya
as she
Moore.
tucked her arm affectionately
Hold on,
into
let me see.
Alice's,
It's her
and
name.
they walked off together.
Kenya is her last name Moore.
Alice was very glad to find her in
Is it
such a
Kenya
pleasant
Moore?
temper, and
Yes,
thought to
Kenya
herself
Moore.
that perhaps it was only the pepper that had made her so savage when they met in the kitchen. When
My
I'm
bag.
anxious, she
I'm
said to
leaning
herself,
over. And
"Do
her
not
baby
in a
name
very
is
hopeful tone, though. I won't
Brooklyn.
have any pepper
I'm just
in
going
my
to put down
kitchen
baby
at all.
Brooklyn.
Soup does very well without. Maybe it's
Baby
always
Brooklyn.
pepper that makes
I
me
put
hot-tempered,"
Brooklyn
she went on,
on the
very
bottom.
much pleased at having found out a new kind of rule.
Ah,
And vinegar that makes them
my
sour,
bag.
and chamomile that makes them bitter, and barley sugar and such
Brooklyn.
things that make children
What's her
sweet-tempered.
last name?
I only wish people
I'll
knew
forget
that,
the last
and they
name.
wouldn't be so stingy about it, you know.
Yeah, forget the last name. Checking the
She had
camera
quite
again.
forgotten the Duchess by this time, and was a little startled when she heard her voice
This
close
Alice
to her ear.
Wonderland, but I tell you, talking about some
"You're
straight
thinking about
roominess.
something, my dear,
But
and
it's
that
quite
makes you forget to
enjoyable.
talk.
I say
can't tell you
enjoyable.
just now what the
Enjoyable.
that is, but I shall remember
Enjoy.
it in a bit.
I just enjoy
Perhaps
it.
it hasn't won,"
It's
Alice
entertaining.
ventured to remark.
Like I said,
"Tut tut, child," said the Duchess.
keeping my mind
"Everything's
going
going
for the
well, if only you can find it."
holidays.
And she
Thanksgiving's in a
squeezed
couple of
herself up
weeks.
closer to Alice's side as she
Trying to
spoke.
feel pretty good.
Alice did
And
not much like
I feel
keeping so
very
close
proud of
to
my
her.
Kenya
First,
picture.
because
Let's
the
see.
Duchess was very ugly, and secondly,
My
because she was
Kenya.
exactly the right height to
Kenya
rest her
Moore
chin
and her
on
baby
Alice's shoulder,
Brooklyn.
and it was an
cartoon that I made. Got a beautiful baby. Very pretty. Mm-hmm. I love it. I think Jesus